Alright, everybody, we are beginning our latest episode of the Safely Extreme podcast for the week of October 10th, 2021. We have a new series we're going to be starting up, but as always, I am Josh Placer from Game Wisdom, and joining me, my co host from Nexus Games, or soon to be, title pending, Sharky.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. And we have the meme of can we get the new name for the company and a logo? And working on it.
We actually have two memes today, as we're going to be starting our series examining genres, kind of breaking down the popular trends and seeing where things have gone and where they could go in the future. And what would be the best one to start with would be the ever popular question, what is a roguelike? Exactly. And
what is a rogue? I hope everybody brought their memes.
So the roguelike genre has been one of the longest running ones. It is the subject of my third book, Game Design Deep Dive Roguelikes. So if you're interested in further answering that question, be sure to pick that one out or pick that one up. But
the question is, does your book answer the question, what is a rogue?
Yes, it does. So you have to buy at least 5 copies so to get all the answers. So the genre itself has seen new life and has really shifted in terms of its terminology and its approach over the last, I guess we could say, 40 years of its existence. So most people, at least most people in the mod audience, like if you started playing roguelikes over the last 5-10 years, most likely you started with NFTL, Spelunky, Binding of Isaac, or even more quote-unquote contemporary examples like Slay the Spire, Monster Train, Hades. But the genre... but the genre as a whole is nothing like those games, or at least what people consider to be traditional roguelikes, or what they consider to be like the true definition of it. And that goes back to the days of, well, Rogue, NetHack, Umoria, and there's a lot of classic roguelikes. The genre never really died. It just never really blew up in the mainstream in that classical sense.
So, basically, it evolved into shoot-off genres, which we call, roguelike and roguelite, which are very, very confusing because they sound almost the exact same. You have rogue, and then LITE, and then LIKE. I mean, could they not get any less confusing terms like rogue similar and rogue adjacent or something rather than roguelike and roguelite?
What about a rogue Metroid Likevania? Would that be too confusing?
Not at all. Hey, Anton.
Hey, Anton. Thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying it. And hopefully the jump scare I put in the book doesn't get you.
Or maybe hopefully it does. Why'd you put it in there if you weren't trying to get people?
Yeah, and the problem though is that for the developers who don't consider like modern day roguelites, deck builders, action, whatever you want to describe it, they don't consider them to be true roguelikes. So for them, a roguelike is essentially, it is a top-down game, it is turn-based, specifically Wego style, and there is an emphasis on replayability, proc gen, and the difficulty that that is give or take. That's one of the more interesting aspects I'm sure we'll touch on at length during this episode. But the whole Wego style, this is the question I have for you and for the audience. What do you think about Wego turn-based? And what that means for people who don't know is that everything moves concurrently. So it's not like I move my character and then you move your character. It's I move my character and the exact same time everybody moves their character.
I'm personally not a fan of it.
Hmm.
Not anything against it or anything. It's just not my cup of tea because, like, when I think turn based and planning my moves out and everything,
Hmm.
I want to plan for my opponent's future moves, not my opponent's current moves. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I just feel like that it's just not my kind of strategy.
Yeah, and it is a very like if you're not used to it, it's very awkward to play a game around this because, like you said, you're not planning moves in advance. You're planning your current move, and it it's kind of like that whole like pausable real time uh, that we see in a lot of or we see in certain RPGs, and I'm not a big fan of pausable real time. I think like for me, it's like either I want to be fully real time or I want complete turn based. I don't want some mixture of the two.
I think a mixture of the two can be good if it's done right,
Hmm.
like FTL.
Hmm. Or maybe something like Valkyria Chronicles in a
Yeah,
more abstracted sense.
yeah. But
Yeah.
like the other thing I don't like about the WeGo kind of thing is I've noticed just from like when you play those games because I really
Hmm.
don't play the WeGo ones.
Hmm.
When you play them, I just all the time when I see it, it's like they're just dancing around. You're just dancing around the
Hmm.
circle. It feels like a game of
Rodeo.
ring around the rosy,
Hmm.
pocket full of toesies, kind of thing. You just see, I'll move one space away, you move one space behind me, and just you can infinitely run away, and it's like there's not much threat there if you know how to properly skirt the enemies.
Yeah. Or you
And
get that one enemy just refuses to get into the alignment, and then you're spending like an extra 30 seconds, trying to get into that right angle to hit them.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's just it doesn't feel good to me personally.
Mm. Yeah, and like I said, like at the start, roguelikes in that style, they never died. It never went away. People didn't just, one day say, we don't want to make these games anymore. They have been popular among their audience, again, for about 40 years now. But when we look at kind of the mainstream, I think this will kind of be a running theme for the series, is how much does the mainstream understand or appreciate the genre? And for the mainstream, traditional roguelikes just weren't all that interesting to them. The probably like the one exception or the one that kind of had the biggest breakout in the 90s and the early 2000s would be the Mystery Dungeon series. This was done by I believe it's a Chunsoft, and they made the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. They made Shiren the Wanderer. They're basically like the one developer who made all these games in Japan. And the things that kind of separated the Mystery Dungeon series from traditional roguelikes, one was a greater use of aesthetics. Like if you remember when we played Shiren the Wanderer on stream a few months ago, that does not look like ASCII graphics. That looks like a very well, at least for the time, aesthetically pleasing game. But the other aspect is kind of, and I think this will be another major trend we'll be discussing in this episode, is the use of persistence. And persistence has become one of the more polarizing aspects of roguelike and roguelite design. This idea that you bring carryover from run to run, that you're not just starting back at zero. And I guess here's another question for you and for the audience. What do you think about games like the roguelike genre that you die and you're back at zero? It could be a new world, things obviously can be procedurally generated, but in terms of your progress, it's gone. See you later.
In general, I'm not a fan of it. there are exceptions like FTL. Like I dearly love FTL, one of my top games of all times, and it does that very thing. But
Mm-hmm.
like I can't find any other good examples like that I really like. It's just FTL, nothing else. Like the even all the FTL clones kind of thing and inspired games and all that, not floating my boat. Nothing that completely reset progress besides FTL
Mm-hmm.
ever spoke to me. So like not a big fan of that area. On the other hand, when you talk about the persistence and everything, there's far more of those games that definitely attracted me. Not a whole lot, but
Mm-hmm.
the I think the number one killer for those games is when they build it so you have to play through like so many hundreds of
Mm-hmm.
or thousands of times before you can actually beat it, where they make it grindy for the sake of grind and padding out, and just like that does not work at all. But when they're not focused on grinding and it's just here's a really really hard game kind of thing, and let's just say there's 12 levels, realistically, if you're really experienced with the game or the genre kind of thing, you could probably go in there and
Mm-hmm.
make it to like 9, 10, on your first run kind of thing, if you're really good at it. Whereas when you're not really good at it, you're probably only gonna make it to one
Mm-hmm.
or two,
Yeah.
and then you're going to get some persistence and everything that is going to help you make it easier on yourself and get farther into it by better gear, better weapons, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
items, power-ups, stat boost, whatever it is. And in a way, the persistence is in a way accessibility in
Mm-hmm.
the terms of helping players with less skill be able to make it farther through their game.
Yeah. And persistence is definitely a major aspect of when we talk about like the modern roguelike, the one that most mainstream audiences are more well aware of. And that leads into more of the whole roguelike versus roguelite aspect. But we'll talk about that one in a few minutes.
Another
The
thing I thought of is on the persistence.
mm-hmm.
Another thing it kind of acts as is it acts as almost dynamic difficulty
Mm-hmm.
in a way.
Yeah. And that's a major point about the use of persistence when the game is balanced either correctly or incorrectly. That we've played, and for those of you who've been watching the streams, we've played plenty of roguelikes and lights where the persistence is so overtuned that you literally can't make progress on your like first 5 to 10 runs because the stats are just simply against you. But then we have games where if you're good, you can do a lot with very little, and then those extra boosts will push you even further, such as with Undermine and Hades, where, I've gotten to the point in Hades that I don't need anywhere near the best perks and the best unlocks, and I can make a really solid run through it. The same goes for Undermine, that I beat the main story, and I think it was like maybe less than 10 actual runs, just because I played the game so many times that I knew what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with kind of the growing changes of the rogue genre, that again, outside of the Mystery Dungeon series, the mainstream really didn't know or do too much in terms of traditional roguelikes. And I mean, again, NetHack is considered to be one of the top examples. It is like one of the oldest examples, and it's still being supported today. But I still don't think most mainstream audiences know what NetHack is.
I don't know what it is.
What is a
But
NetHack?
here, yeah, what is a net hack? What is a rogue?
Mm-hmm. But were you about to say something else on that?
No.
Okay. But when we look at kind of the history of the genre, and when it started to push towards the mainstream, one of the best examples would be Dungeons of Dreadmore. This was the opening game by Gaslamp Games. And this was released, I believe it was 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. And what this game did was it brought a sense of aesthetics to the genre. It was focused more on humor, as well as, being challenging, but also had accommodations in terms of difficulty settings, different perks, different things like that. So there was this idea that you could kind of have it both ways. You could make a very challenging, it's 2011, you can make a very challenging roguelike, but you can at least start giving new players a leg up. And I think this is what kind of began this idea of why does a roguelike need to be very archaic or very set in its ways to try and, can we make that more appealing to a larger audience?
Mhm. Yeah, and when I think about FTL, I've never cared for the graphical aesthetics of FTL.
Mm-hmm.
They were good enough to be serviceable, but that was it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like they met the very minimum bar for me, and had it been much lower, I probably wouldn't have tried the game out, to be
Mm-hmm.
honest. But I dearly love that game. I have played it so many times. I have gotten to where, like, if I'm playing it on easy mode, I can win probably, like, I think like something like 80-90% of the time
Mm-hmm.
on my runs. But when I'm playing like normal, I can win probably about, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
50% of the time. Although
Mm-hmm.
when I put the extended content in there with the flak and all that stuff, probably brings that down to more like 40 or 35 or something like that. Never tried it on hard though, but like still it's a very, very challenging game, and there is runs where there is no chance you have to win, none whatsoever. But those are fairly few and far between. Now there's certainly runs that a certain individual, there's no way they could win, kind of thing. Like where I got the 50% win rate on normal kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know I used to watch a streamer who could
Mm-hmm.
win probably like 90%, 95% of every run on normal,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, dang.
Yep, and that is a major point about the proc gen or just the learning or the gameplay loop of roguelikes, lights, whatever. That while a lot of it is about, what you get in a run, the primary factor of success, or what should be success, is the player's own skill at the game. That, again, give a master player just basic weapons, basic luck, they can probably still either beat the game or get really damn close. Give them really great stuff, and they'll just utterly break the game. We've seen this in my Biome Isaac plays, and Hades, and even stuff like deck builders, like Slay the Spire Monster Train. That if you're really good at the game and you get the best stuff, nothing's really going to stop you. And that is part of the joy of playing the roguelike genre. This idea that, well, anything can happen. That is why, proc gen or procedural generation has become such a major point of it. That if you have 100 runs of a roguelike, you should get 100 different experiences. And if you don't, then something's gone wrong.
Yeah. And I feel like something went wrong when we're talking about Dead Cells kind of thing.
Hmm.
Like I really enjoyed that game at first. Like it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. And I never got good at it.
Hmm.
I was got better. I was able to beat the first map, go on to the second map, all the second maps. There's like what, three different second maps?
There's like there's so many of them, and they've added
But like
more.
you know, the thing is though, is like I played through that first one so many times and like yeah, the map layouts are changing, where the enemy spawns are changing, but like the whole feel of everything doesn't change, and like
Hmm.
it feels like I feel like they could have not changed the map layout and not changed the enemy layout, and it would have been pretty much the exact same as what I got. So like it got kind of stale to a point,
Hmm.
and I feel like that's where it kind of lacked kind of thing, and that's what in the end made me quit kind of thing. I
Hmm.
did make it to the third maps a few times kind of thing, a few of them. I don't know which ones. It's been a while since then, but I know I made to the third map a few times.
Yeah.
But it just burned me out, and just like the item collection and getting all that stuff was just very very grindy, and I was having to do that same thing so many
Hmm.
times, and it felt like I just wasn't really getting anywhere, like
Hmm.
I like I was at the limits of my skills kind of thing, and got as about as good as I was going to get kind of thing, without memorization kind of thing.
Hmm.
And yeah, it was just kind of a dead end for me. And it's like I can keep on grinding and unlock stuff, and maybe I'll get something, and maybe I'll get enough stuff to help me farther, by getting more healing, getting better starting gear,
Hmm.
such, but like I didn't want to keep on grinding for over and over and over again on something I was already really tired of.
Yeah.
So like that's where the game lost me, kind of thing.
Yeah, and this is another, I think, issue that we saw with when the genre began to again splinter out towards the action roguelikes, roguelites, and so on. That there is a very big difference between good and bad procedural generation. And Prog Gen in of itself, that is another episode waiting to happen. Like it's way too big for us to explore here. But the problem that a lot of games face is that if the beginning of a roguelike is just, copy pasted 10,000 times, and there's not enough to break up that beginning monotony, it's hard, I think, to motivate someone to keep playing. And that's, again, where a lot of the traditional roguelikes start. That you begin with, one sword and maybe one piece of food, hopefully you'll find something better in the next 10 minutes. It's the same thing if you remember when I played Assurin the Wanderer, that it very much falls into that same play. Now, of course, Sharon has persistence, but if you don't have those items, you're still replaying things. Whereas with something like Slay the Spire, FTL, and so on, that probably within the first 10 minutes, maybe even the first 5 minutes of starting a new run, the paths begin to diverge. Your very first pickup, your very first, item unlock, that, sends you down a completely different path. Whereas with Dead Cells, and with a lot of the other games, it kind of felt like, okay, I get a new sword, I'm still swinging the sword. You know, what is really changing in my run? Maybe I do a little
Yeah,
bit more damage. Maybe I'm going to be a fire spec. But the same basic strategy doesn't change. Whereas
I'm gonna
with,
go up and hit things with my sword.
yeah, with FTL, getting focusing on missiles is a different strategy than focusing on lasers, which is different than, doing crew transports and mind control and drones.
And just regular guns. I mean, you can spam some regular guns and just do massive damage. One of my strategies was get the if I could get the right pulls, is just get the one energy based weapon. I think it was one energy cost. There was one that was also like it. There was two energies kind of thing, and I think it was like 2 shots. Both shots do 1 damage kind of thing. And like if you had like 4 of those, you could shred through an entire shield with 2, max shields with 2, the first 2, and then like knock out 2 rooms with the other 2 in your first thing. So your first thing, you could shred through their shields, then hit their shield room twice, if not 4 times, to completely disarm their shields, kind of thing. So they have to repair, or hit their weapons twice, hit their shields twice, and that's just your 4 basic guns, kind of thing. Of course, there's other strategies where you have the the laser, and you can just plow through a lot of things, and that's honestly my favorite thing. But like, there's just so many ways you can build it, and every way is different, and you have to kind of almost guess at what the RNG is going to give you, kind of thing. And you can do all these combos in between. Like you could do like if I could get a couple of those things and get a laser on top of that, ooh man, just shred the shield and then just laser the heck out of everything.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for the Binding of Isaac. And the Binding of Isaac and Spelunky are probably what we'll be focusing more on in the next few minutes, because that's when we began to see the real mainstream break of the roguelike genre. But
I think another thing that sunk Dead Cells was the fact that the levels were so long. Because if you were not doing a speed run, if you were going through and legitimately exploring and trying to get everything, it would take you 15-20 minutes to clear one of those levels, if not longer.
And length and pacing of roguelikes is a very difficult thing to balance, because the longer you make an individual run, the more weight that you attach to it. It's why games like The Binding of Isaac, Slay the Spire, Monster Train, Hades, that most of their runs are between 30 minutes to an hour, give or take. Probably even I've seen people like speedrun Hades in like 20 minutes. Once they really know what they're doing, they get lucky. But when we see roguelikes, and even traditional rogues that are approaching, 4 hours, 6 hours, and stuff like that, it becomes, I think, far less motivating to restart.
And
when
it's too long, you don't want to go back.
And the kind of breaking of the game, it's a very interesting idea. Like, in a lot of traditional roguelikes, you can certainly get really good combinations of items and gear and then just destroy the game. But it really wasn't until, again, like this more mainstream approach, that it became more of an option for a wider audience. And that, I think, is a good segue into talking about Binding of Isaac and Spelunky. And this is when we get into the quote-unquote action roguelike portion of our talk here. Because when we look at roguelikes, and again, the traditional roguelike being turn-based WeGo, the rise of the action roguelike is really where this divide began to happen. That suddenly it wasn't turn-based. Binding of Isaac and Spelunky are not turn-based games. Maybe they're visual novels. What do you think?
I thought they were first-person shooters.
Yeah, well, Isaac, you shoot tears, so it's a first-person shooter. But with these games, suddenly you had a game built on ProcGen. It was meant to be replayed, but it was not turn-based. Not in the slightest. And this is when the market really began to shift. That suddenly we could put roguelike elements into other games. So here's my question for you, because this is such a very muddy answer. When you hear roguelikes or roguelike elements, what comes into your mind when you hear about that in a game?
You mean like what is it going to have
Yeah, like
in
if
it?
someone says, this is a roguelike shooter, or a roguelike platformer, or a roguelike RPG. Like when you hear the roguelike part, what do you associate that to?
Well, procedural generation in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Levels, uh, items, equipment, uh, the layouts of levels. Because like when I said levels and layouts of levels, the thing I'm talking about there is the difference is one is how the procedural lays things out, the level design, and the other one is sometimes you might start up in the ice biome, sometimes you might start up in the fire biome, sometimes you might start up in the plant biome, etc. kind of thing. Just like so it's not just layouts kind of thing that are procedural. And the other thing I think about is you know enemies being procedural as of the way they're placed, as well as if it's the like and or the light,
Mm-hmm.
then procedural elements.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And you hope to be a rogue one day, Foreign? Alright, go for it. And the again, like what you described there definitely hits a lot of the notes. This idea that the game is going to be meant to be replayed. That is, I think, one of the most important aspects. And the replay factor of a roguelike needs to be on point because, again, rogues are not the same as a traditional or a linear game. And that also will be a major point when we start talking about roguelites, probably in the next point about this. That in a traditional game, it could be an 8 to 20 hour experience, could be 5 hours, it could be 100 hours. But when you're done with that, you shelve the game, you're not going to replay the game right then and there. With a roguelike, you're going to have an hour, maybe less run, but you're going to replay that probably 50, 100, 1,000 times. Again, there are people who have thousands of hours in the Binding of Isaac. I'm sure there's people who are reaching that point. Sorry, a bug was flying around me. Reaching that point FTL as well. That the game is so replayable and there's so much variance in those runs that you can just, yes, you've been in the game, but have you been, this run the game or this run?
Yeah, I only have 84 hours in FTL, sadly. I don't think it's tracking my hours right, but I could have swore I had more than that.
Yeah.
But I could have swore I had like 140 or something. But the here's a sort of off topic, but not quite off topic. What do you think about, and we haven't seen much of this, if we've even seen it all. What do you think about a game that is another genre first, and then they add rogue elements, kind of thing, like the persistence, the random gen kind of thing? Like just not trying to make it where they still have longer playthroughs kind of thing than your rogues, but they're not trying to get you to do as many of them. They're trying to definitely more focus on normal progression with a side of rogue progression kind of thing.
That is very tricky because we've seen games kind of experiment with like a rogue-ish style bonus mode or a system like that. There's been RPGs that have had randomized dungeons. One dungeon out of all the other ones in the game that is randomized. And the problem, I think, with this is that for a roguelike to work, or at least the better ones to work, the game has to be really designed from the start to accommodate this. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been seeing, again, this kind of leads into this trend of the growing market of more developers adding in roguelike modes with it. And hopefully I don't butcher this too badly, to Citizen with the cool numbers in the name. Yeah, this idea of procedural generation, resource management, working with what you have, those are major points. But when we look at kind of the splintering of it and trying to integrate into other genres, it becomes its own very unique beast. I think what you said there about kind of, is it a roguelike first, or is it the major genre first, is a big point about this. The idea of a shmup roguelike. Games like Monolith, I always forget the other one, the one with Cthulhu in it. But these are games that are very much a shmup first, but also have those rogue elements. Whereas
that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. But then there are, one second, allergies are just starting to kill me here. But then there are games that try to be a roguelike first, but then throw the shmup side in second. And those games typically feel less interesting because proc gen for the sake of proc gen doesn't save a game. And that is a very important point about this, because here's an example of a game that tried to do just that. Who here has played A Valley Without Wind by Arkham Games?
I do feel like they're, I feel like the beat 'em up genre is one that could, benefit from rogue elements kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Not to be confused with the, the rogue mode for Street Fighter.
Mm-hmm.
But, I know that in what was it, River City Girls?
Mm-hmm.
I really loved the way their maps were laid out kind of thing. What if you had a procedural version of that,
Mm-hmm.
I think that would just add so much to that game, especially if you added stuff into the game, like procedural elements that would, carry over.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be really cool, especially if you then took and made a better combat system, made the game better overall as a beat 'em up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that could go pretty far.
Mm-hmm.
Because beat 'em ups in general are pretty short games. So are side-scrolling shooters and whatnot, top-down shooters.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those short genres are the ones that are, I think, most compatible with rogue-like elements.
Yep, and that has been a very big point about, again, this splintering of the term. That genres that are known for being relatively short gameplay loops, or very short sessions, really apply themselves well to roguelike elements. Because if your game is only 20 to 30 minutes long, you can add elements to that to mix things up on each run. The same thing with, again, shmup and roguelike, that with Monolith. Or with, again, the name, I'm going to keep bothering me until I remember the name of it. But when you add these elements to a shorter play style, again, the joy of a roguelike is, yes, it's only 30 minutes to an hour long, but times that by every possible variance, and it's why people who really get into a solid roguelike can play them for hundreds of hours.
Yeah. And your average side scrolling or top down scrolling shooters, what, about an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours?
Yeah, maybe even less than
So
that if you know what you're doing.
yeah, but I mean like standard playtime,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that's too long to add the rogue like elements to it. And like the same thing goes for the beat 'em up. I mean, the average of beat 'em up is what, like hour 10 to like 2 hours.
Yeah. Some of them
I
will.
think it's right there, and it's longer than a rogue is, but I don't think it's so long that adding roguelike elements, as long as you don't make them grindy,
Mm-hmm.
will detract from it. I think it'll add more to it. As
Yeah.
long as, and most people don't beat 'em up or a side scrolling shooter on their first go anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So adding that procedural bit to it can give the player a new experience when they're going through a second time.
Yep.
And I think that would be beneficial.
Or a 50th time.
Yeah.
And to bring this back to A Valley Without Wind, what A Valley Without Wind did is that they tried to procedurally generate everything. Every level, every room was procedurally generated. You had no idea what was ever going to show up in it, and it was just complete chaos. And the problem is that complete chaos makes for a very confusing experience. I'm sure there are people who love A Valley Without Wind 1, but the problem is that if you don't have some semblance of structure, the entire thing breaks down. This is something that a lot of roguelike developers have spoken about. A lot of people, I think, from the outside, think of a roguelike as in, I saw a run, I find the Sword of Ultimate Power, run is over. That's my entire run. Or the run is, I start, I pick up an item, I immediately get poisoned, runs over, I fail. What you want, or what is seen in roguelikes, is that there has to be some kind of structure to how these levels are laid out. You can break or adjust the structure in very small or very specific ways. But the idea is that over the course from beginning to end of a roguelike or roguelite experience, there has to be the man behind the curtain guiding it all. And that's where your algorithm comes in. If it's just, anything and everything can happen, it doesn't make for as quality of an experience.
Yeah, I think that leaving things just random is a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
You need procedural in there rather than random, which
Mm-hmm.
is the difference between random generation and procedural generation.
Yep.
And procedural puts limitations on the random generation so that
Mm-hmm.
you don't, I don't know, find a refrigerator in somebody's, bathroom, because why would a refrigerator be in somebody's bathroom?
Or a house has 47 bathrooms and one bedroom.
No bedrooms, just 47 bathrooms.
Well, I mean, a
And
bathtub could be a bed. You can adapt.
yeah, you sleeping in the bathtub is always a good idea, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
what the Health and Safety Commission say, right?
Yeah.
They just say, take a sleep in the bathtub. Don't worry about drowning. You won't have to worry about it in the morning.
And to Citizen's comment about if it's too short, that there isn't enough room for variety, that is another very big point. That if it's too short of a gameplay loop, there's not enough elements, it doesn't really hit that point of variance. The game Gloom is a good example of this. Gloom is for me, it's a very underrated gem of an action roguelike. But the problem with it is that the runs are like 12 to 15 minutes long. And you would think that, 12 to 15 minute long runs would be, very replayable. But the problem is that there's just not enough there to give it that sense of replayability. That there are specific weapons and perks in Gloom that you're going to need to win, or they'll make life easier for you. So there's just not enough of that same thing that we saw with the Binding of Isaac or with FTL, where, I pick up an item, I can adapt, I can roll with those punches. With a game like Gloom, it's basically, did I get X, Y, and Z? No? Then most likely I'm going to fail if I try to do some of the advanced stuff in it. Or
Here's a
even just
question
make
for
it
you.
to it.
On Gloom, was it the fact that the playtime was short, or was it the fact of a lack of variance,
Hmm,
or both?
it's kind of both. That there's a lot of items in Gloom, but you are in such a very compacted area. I think there's, let me see, one, two, three. I think there's 3 or 4 biomes total, and you can only get maybe 1 to 2 items per biome. So you really don't have the space. Like in FTL, for instance, you can spend a whole lot of time going to shops, getting extra scrap, and trying to make those builds work. In a game like
Mm,
Gloom, it's such a short experience, you are just pushed, to the end whether you like it or not.
mm.
Yeah, and
So there's
by
no like taking your time
no,
exploring and trying to
definitely
get
no.
something better.
No, everything is laid out on a very linear track. So you really don't have that opportunity.
So maybe it's the linearity
Hmm.
and the rather than the length.
Yeah. And to Foreign's comment about like Binding of Isaac, again, it's one of the reasons why I mentioned it so heavily in the roguelike book and why it gets brought up in these discussions. That when we talk about kind of the quintessential action roguelike, the Binding of Isaac and maybe to a lesser extent Enter the Gungeon would probably be number 1 and number 2 on that list. Because the Binding of Isaac, it really drives home just how much, the right, putting your finger down on like those certain scales of what's going to be affected by the prog gen can just really influence the game. And I think this is what goes back to one of the reasons why you liked FTL so much. That a lot of the procedural generation of FTL, and to the same extent, Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon, is on what do you do during a run. Whether you get a really good item, a really good part or drone in FTL or whatever, it's this idea that,
You can adapt.
yeah, you don't know what your build's going to be. I don't know what I'm going to get in the Binding of Isaac. I don't know what I'm going to get in FTL. But I do know one thing: if I'm going to win, I have to adapt to it. Whereas with a lot of the lesser action roguelikes and roguelites, it basically comes down to, did I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on my checklist? Yes, I'm going to win. Did I get 1, 2, 3, and 6? No? Then, I'm not going to be able to win that. And this is why you need to have not only enough items to create variants, but there needs to be enough viability to them as well. That if you give me an item that literally the final boss is immune to, that's a dead item. Why should I ever take that item if I know that when I get to the end, it's just going to be a wasted space in my inventory?
Yeah. And that's the the adaptability I think is very important because
Mm-hmm.
like FTL, when you get to the final boss, there is no one strategy that wins.
Mm-hmm.
You have to adapt based off of whatever you get, kind of thing. And like, you know, you could have a all guns, way, and you could win that way. But there's you could also have a bunch of lasers. You could have one really powerful laser and
Mm-hmm.
couple missiles. You could have a powerful laser and or middle laser and a few guns kind of thing. But every way you're able to adapt, with the everything's able to hit the shields except for the missile, so you can whittle those down. But then you could just take the missile and bypass the shields and hit the shield generator kind of thing. And you have to get the shields down to be able to beat them, and then you have to be able to take down other parts of him so he does take you down kind of thing. And combat in general was all the same throughout it, but more extreme on the final boss. But like there's you could also teleport in. There's all kinds of different things, but each thing has their own viability, and they all work together as long as you can adapt and build things together.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a very interesting point, because, and this is something I talked about in the book, that when you're trying to define or balance items, you're trying to give the player outs, or you're trying to give them a solution. It shouldn't be, like, it's a difference between, say, I'm going to give this character fire damage, and let's say we have enemies immune to fire damage. Well, that entire build is wrong, or it's not going to work. But let's say we have builds that are designed around, let's say, direct damage, or damage over time, or, reflect damage, or, thorn builds. All those builds are doing damage, but they're doing different kinds of, they're doing it in different ways. The goal is still the same. I need to, this boss has 500 points of health, I need to do 500 points of damage. But how I get to that in each run is going to be demonstrably different.
I think a fire immunity in almost every game or any kind of element, immunity is almost always a wrong choice to put into a game. Like resistance, yes, they're resistant to fire, so they take less damage from it. But almost never should you make them completely immune. The only games I can think of that complete immunity to an element that would be acceptable would be an RPG, because like you're supposed to think, and you have you have a black mage here that can do all the elements kind of thing. So it's like, well, I shouldn't use fire, let's use one of the others, kind of thing. Instead of, because you have direct choices there at all points, because that's a game are built around choices and strategy rather than, specific builds kind of thing that you can't just freely change on a whim, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And when you can't freely change things on a whim, making something completely resistant to something is a huge red flag.
Yeah. Like in Library of Ruina, they do have bosses that just say, these 5 things you've been using this whole time, yeah, we're immune to that. But it's also a game where you can completely rebuild your deck before every boss fight. So it's more about that strategy and planning, as opposed to just, throwing a whammy at your player base and saying, hey, you really like using ice damage for the last 20 hours? You can't use it anymore, Hope you didn't build your entire strategy around that. And
you need the ice fire build.
Or fiery ice. Yeah. But that could be DLC. And I think, again, like, this kind of gets at the hallmark of what makes a good roguelike, or any of the splits that we talk about. There has to be variance and viability. That whatever I find doing a run, I should be able to make that work to some extent. Obviously they're going to be built better or worse than anything. But you want to avoid having the one dud. That one item that you take it just kills your entire run kind of thing. And, like, the Binding of Isaac, again, is such a weird case here. Because there's over 600 items in that game now. And there are probably tier lists on top of tier lists in terms of what people consider to be the best items and what you can do in that. And I'm sure there are plenty of items that are at the very bottom of those lists. And I know Edmund wanted people just to take everything and anything that they find, but
And
it's
he should have made it automatic.
yeah. But it is a very hard point when if you know that item C is a horrible item that you should not take, you know, how do you square that circle? Do you try and rebalance that item? Do you weaken other items? Which mostly you don't. You never want to weaken other choices to make another choice stand out. And it is very difficult, and why a lot of the more advanced examples of these games are very complicated in terms of their balancing.
Yeah, I find that balancing wise, I think the best way to balance it is side grades.
Hmm.
Because like, you know, when you do things that are numerically better or worse kind of thing, you generally get like this offsetting of balance. But when you
Hmm.
have a whole bunch of side grades kind of thing,
Hmm.
then you have this, everything's sort of uniform in power, but everything is also really useful kind of thing. Of
Yeah.
course, I would put some variance in there of a little bit higher and a little bit lower kind of thing, but I wouldn't probably stray too far up or down kind of thing. I would
Hmm.
mainly focus on sideways.
Yeah. And side grades, for those of you watching who don't know what we're discussing, these are items that will oftentimes have a benefit, but at the same time will have some kind of downside to them. That it's not just, here's an item that gives you 50 attack, 100 points of health, and makes you immune to all damage. It could be, here's an item that lets you do 20 more points of range damage, but now all your melee damage is now 30 points weaker. That
Yeah.
you're trading a benefit. Yeah, exactly, Foreign. You're trading a benefit for a disadvantage. But again, let's say you're building an entirely range build. Who the hell cares if my sword does 15 points less of damage? I'm using assault rifle for the next hour.
Yeah, I know that FTL does a lot of this,
Mm-hmm.
where like you can get this gun that shoots and does 2 damage, and it takes 13 seconds to charge.
Mm-hmm.
Where there's another weapon that shoots and does 1 damage kind of thing, but it only takes 9 seconds, or
Mm-hmm.
I think 7 seconds, something like that.
Yep.
And there's another weapon that shoots 2 singular shots kind of thing, and and you can, or maybe it's 3, and you can charge it for as long as you want, up to the 3 max. And I think the max, I think it's like
Mm-hmm.
7 seconds per charge or something. And with that, all of them have roughly the same DPS. There's a little bit higher and a little bit lower kind of thing in there,
Mm-hmm.
but there's so many different more strategies kind of thing, because like when you have the single shot kind of thing, this is something you would just train on a target and just keep it down kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
you have the 2 damage kind of thing. This is great for taking stuff down and specifically cracking through shields. And then you have the charge one, which would be even better at cracking down a shield,
Mm-hmm.
but since it's has a lower DPS kind of thing, it's less effective later on kind of thing,
Yeah.
after you get the shield cracked. So like everything has it's all side grades. They're all kind of in that same DPS bracket. At the same time, they're all very, very different in how you can use them for your strategy. They're all side grades.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you want to have this, and going back to what Foreign said a minute ago, that you never want something to be your answer be, why the hell should I ever take this? Like, in what world would this item ever be useful? What you want is to say, okay, this item doesn't work for my build. But let's say, for instance, I get another item that synergizes with it. Suddenly, we have this kind of build up going. And there are cases where, under the right circumstances, quote unquote bad choices can be game breaking. Like if let's say you have a weapon that every time you swing your sword, it costs you 2 points of health. Okay, why would I ever want to use a weapon that's going to kill me? But let's say I get an item that any damage done to me that's less than 5 is negated. Well, guess what? 2 damage becomes 0. So now this weapon that is probably even more powerful, I've completely negated its downside. But
then maybe you have another item that says every time you take damage, you get some kind of buff, or something.
So,
and to Florin, the reason why to take the 1 damage one is not because it's inefficient, but because it's efficient, because it only costed 1 energy to actually power up rather than 2 energy on the others.
Yeah. So suddenly what we have here is this kind of, the island of misfit toys. That individually, these choices are horrible. They're not going to work for you. But when you start combining them, suddenly you could have something very game-breaking. And we get into kind of like those like Yu-Gi-Oh! Turnaround plays that we saw on the show, and they just like invent some crazy rule and they break the game.
Oh, just I'm going to attack the moon.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the strategy for FTL, is I'm just going to attack the moon.
Let's see. We're about 55 minutes in. I figure, what do you think? Maybe another 15 to 20 minutes? Maybe a little bit more than that?
We could go that long.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes. But
are we going to hit on the elephant in the room? The deck builders.
I think we can touch on it. I do want to. I think the final section for these for the series or for each episode should be, I think, talking about what this means for the greater market, because I think that's kind of where we've been aiming at. But the kind of like when we talk about the evolution and where we kind of seen all these elements that we've been discussing over the last hour come together are the deck builders. And if you really want to drive a traditional, I think, roguelike fan a little crazy, mention deck building roguelikes to them. Because that just completely breaks the whole terminology. Because this is, again, where we start... Oh, I almost forgot. We didn't talk about roguelike and roguelite differences. So we may get to that one next.
We did.
A little bit. I guess, just to clarify it, that roguelite has persistence between runs. As in, what you do on run A will provide you with resources and elements for run B. If you just simply unlock elements, new things that show up from run to run, that is not a roguelite. Yeah, exactly. Foreign, I think, summed it up really well. That if the persistence is at that point where you can just break the game, that's a roguelite, and it also means that the game is over. While roguelikes are built on the inherent variance of each run, giving it intense or amazing replayability. But back to the point that deck building roguelikes, and then there's also deck building roguelites, just to really, confuse everybody. It's this idea again, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about combining genres. That a deck builder or a CCG is another very big genre that's benefited from roguelike elements. Because
CCG is a very, very different.
Yeah.
Because CCGs are, focused on collecting cards and multiplayer and all that.
Yeah. But the idea of playing a hand of cards, an individual play of Slay the Spire, Monster Train, any deck builder, what is that? A minute? 2 minutes of play? Maybe at most 3 to 4. But again, put the roguelike elements on the right aspects, and you can just keep on adding replayability to it.
Mm. And when you look at deck builders, there's just so much stuff you can do. You know, Slay the Spire, Monster Train. What are some other examples?
Vault of the Void, Banners of Ruin. Um, so again, there's over 50 deck building roguelikes on Steam right now. I've played, I think, 45 of them.
There's probably a lot more than 50.
Probably. But yeah, again, the deck building roguelike, much like action roguelikes and the games we've talked about before, they're not about complete chaos. Most of their plays have a very straightforward path from beginning to end. Slay the Spire, it's literally, three branching trees worth of choices, you beat the game. Where they
Hmm.
focus the procedural generation and, again, the variance on is what do you get during those runs? And again, this is where kind of the deck building aspect really synergizes with roguelikes. Because they have fixed cards, but you never know what cards you're going to get in a run. So suddenly, again, you have to build a strategy out of whatever the hell that drops. And the added benefit, and it's something we talked about before in terms of this idea of, player control generation or player guided decision, or however we want to define it, is that the player decides what cards they get. Yes, it's from a pool of, a choice of two or three, but I have a little bit more control over what is going to happen during a run.
Yeah, and I think player having the choice, player agency is a key to these games really working well, I think, because like if you can't adapt to anything, then it's just a linear game. Linear with random, it's linear randomness,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, rather than or linear proceduralness rather than, actually having you're railroaded into whether you can win or lose based
Mm-hmm.
off of what
Again, if I
RNG
don't
Jesus gives you, kind of thing.
Yep, if there's 50 items and let's say one item is the only thing the boss is immune to, I have a 1 in 50 chance of winning my play. And that's not interesting. You want to lose 49 times and get that, one lucky win?
Yeah, it's you know, and the other thing, like I like comparing, Slay the Spire and Monster Train because those are
Mm-hmm.
two very similar games. And I really enjoyed Slay the Spire at first, but I got to the end like three three times, and like every time I got to the end, the boss was perfectly built to crush my strategy that I was built in.
Mm-hmm.
One build I built around armor, so then I had an enemy that is like I think it was like all armor is null. And I was like, well, my entire strategy is null. And then it's like, I built another one that's built off of powers kind of thing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like every time you play a power, the boss gets supercharged. And I'm like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, and another thing. And after it happened like three times, I was like, no, I'm done with this game. I quit.
Mm-hmm.
And I just I was really enjoying it first, but I grew to really dislike it in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to Monster Train, and Monster Train was I think is the basically the way I think about Monster Train is Slay the Spire but better.
Mm-hmm.
It's got all the good things from Slay the Spire and none of the bad things, kind of thing. Like it tells you who the final boss is going to be at the beginning, what they're going to be immune to, so definitely do not do a build that's going to be weak to that. Do
Mm-hmm.
any other build but that build. Like they're going to power up every time you play a power card. So then just do not build a strategy around power cards. Matter of fact, your strategy might be building a thing avoiding power cards completely kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But like it just you know, and you knew that every section you were going to get a certain amount of things, and you knew that there was going to be an enemy at the end. And
Mm-hmm.
you could also scroll down and look and see, oh, well, next time I'm going to be able to remove cards from my deck. Next, or like it's not going to be for like 3 more turns. So or 3 more sections. So should I go ahead and pay this extra to remove this now? Yes,
Mm-hmm.
no, make my decision kind of thing. And you're able to plan it out, and
Yeah.
it's not so much blind thing. And you only get to pick one of two sides kind of thing. So you get to pick whether you want this or these kind of thing. So but
Mm-hmm.
like if you really need, X and you see X on the next thing, you're probably going to go on that side,
Mm-hmm.
no matter even if the other side has two good things, this is the thing you really need right now. So
Yep.
you're going to go for that, and it was really focused on giving you the player agency,
Yep.
your choices matter to an extreme degree, and more than you could ever dream about getting to mean anything in Slay the Spire, because
Mm-hmm.
you never knew what was coming. You
Mm-hmm.
never had any way to plan. There was no strategy other than I'm going to build a real good deck and just hope and pray that I don't go completely fucked over by RNG off of
Yeah.
this really good deck I built. That's all you could do. You build a really good deck and you hope and pray.
Mm-hmm.
We're split in Monster Train. You knew, in general what was coming. You didn't know exactly what was coming, but you knew in general what was coming. You had time to prepare for it. You planned, you plotted out, and you really used your player skill, your player agency to do the best you could. And if you failed at the end, you felt like you lost because you were not good enough, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where in Slay the Spire, oftentimes you lose and you feel like you lost because RNG didn't like
Yeah. And
you.
what you said about having to decide between like different cards, that again gets back to the importance of choice in these games. That you want to avoid just flat out, better options. Do I take a weapon that does 1 point of damage and costs me 3 mana, or do I take a weapon that does 20 points of damage but costs me, 2 points of mana? You know,
It sounds like Hearthstone.
yeah. What you want again is the idea of yes, this card or this option is better or it has higher stats. But if let's say I'm building a discard strategy and this character gains, 5 power every time I discard a card from my hand, well, this guy is going to be far more better for me right now. And that's what you want. You want options that they work, in their perfect times, as opposed to just always being good or always being bad.
And it's all about the side grades, and
Mm-hmm.
you know the other thing about Monster Train is with their procedural generation and everything. When they gave you cards, they gave you cards that the procedural generation thought would be the most useful to you. Like if the game sees you're building a deck around burn damage kind of thing, then more than likely one or two of the cards are going to have something related to burn,
And,
or something off branching from that they might tempt you with to kind of variate your build kind of thing. And it's monitoring your character powers, it's monitoring your deck and what cards are in that, and it's using
mm-hmm.
that to make the procedural generation give you good choices kind of thing. It's
and
it's not trying to give you bad choices. And like we see this in Streets of Rage when we get two things, and it's like I don't want either one of those. Why
yeah.
would we want either one of those kind of thing? And then sometimes it gives us a bunch of amazing things. It's like I want all these things,
Mm-hmm.
where and it's just random the way it does it. The way Monster Train does it, it's like here's 2 or 3 things that you probably want all of every time kind of thing, and it
Mm-hmm.
makes that choice hard on the player
Yeah.
to like, oh, what way do I go? Like, you know, like
And
there's all different kinds of combinations. But then you think about it, you know, well, my focus is this. I have this one card that does this.
mhm.
If I do this, if I get this particular card, then that will supercharge the heck out of my strategy. Where these other two will boost it, but this will supercharge it. I'm going with this. This is a clear winner, but it's not a clear winner outside of context in that one specific build that you got going on, because like other specific builds that are very similar, that whatever could be supercharged kind of thing would be a different card with those same three cards in the same
Mhm.
type of build kind of thing.
Yeah, and a part of the genius of that with monster training is that you choose your strategy based on whatever two factions that you take. So that allows them to have a little bit more control over, what cards you're going to see out of it. And it really does come down to, again, all these different choices that are all trying to solve the same problem. How do I kill the boss? How do I inflict enough damage? And if you can solve that problem or solve that equation with, any number of potential strategies, then you're good. Yes, again, and I think, as we've said, there will always be in these kinds of games choices and builds that are just flat out amazing. You get this, your chance of winning goes up to, let's say, 70 to 80%. But you don't want anything to have a zero or negative impact on your overall strategy. You don't want dead options. And when we say a dead option, we mean that you take this, it will never serve a purpose in any run or in any build of your game.
Yeah, I still remember one of my favorite runs from Monster Train. Like, I was going through and RNG was not being kind to me. It
Mm-hmm.
seemed like I kept on getting these little what was those little guys? The little
The little
worthless.
imps.
Yeah, the imps. Yeah, I kept on getting imps, and like I was like, I don't want imps. Give me something else. And I was like, I'll take it. This is all I gotta have some kind of creature.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept on getting those, and then I got the God of Imps, which basically said for every imp on the field, he was like one cheaper or something, or powered up or something. I can't remember now.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, oh, okay, this is coming around. I can actually get this really OP guy out there for really cheap, if not free.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got, cards that just summoned more imps kind of thing. And then I got, and then I forget what it was, but I got something that I can't remember what it was. It was some kind of spell, a damage spell, and it did more damage, I think, based off of how many imps I had on the field. And it was like, like, yeah, I have this really OP guy that's got like, I think like, 30 or 40 attack. But like now I have this spell that if I have like 10 imps out, kind of thing, this spell does like 150 damage and can like one shot anything but like the bosses,
Mm-hmm.
and even the first ones of those it could one shot, and like
Mm-hmm.
and then I was like, it's I think it was removed from game, and so I quickly went and removed the remove from game, so I could keep on reusing it. And then I put the thing that every time I used it, it came back to my hand at the start of the turn. So like it was just turn, like every turn, just one shot anything, one shot everything, and it was overly broken, and it
Yeah.
was off of one of the worst possible builds I had turned into one of the best builds.
Yeah. And you want to have that potential. That you want to let players feel like they got one over on you when you get like those crazy options that come up.
Hmm.
But I think with that,
And
let's you got any?
it's thanks to their proceduralness that
Mm-hmm.
those popped up, because like had it just been RNG kind of thing, like Slay the Spire, I would have probably never gotten that build,
Mm-hmm.
because Slay the Spire would have never, be like, it would have suggested me, it would gave me the really OP guy and the really OP spell when I didn't have any imps, and it would have given me all the imps when I didn't have any of the other two, and like I could have never put together that build, but since the procedural in Monster Train specifically goes, what do we think would be good for his build kind of thing, it gave me those options.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's the reason why I think that Monster Train in every way is a better Slay the Spire.
Yep. But it certainly did not earn the same amount of sales and prestige.
Sadly not. And
And
the guy from Slay the Spire actually worked on Monster Train, so it's not like
mm-hmm.
I'm crapping all over the guy to embrace a different company. It's he worked on it too. He worked on both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the reason why it was a Baylor Slay the Spire, because in a lot of ways it was Slay the Spire too.
Mm-hmm. And that is the segue into the final point that I want to talk about for our episode this week. And that is, what does the market look like for roguelikes today? And this is going to be, I think, either very positive, very depressing, based on which genre we're covering each week. The roguelike genre as a whole, I think, and maybe, for the audience and for you, maybe you can share your opinion on this, but I think traditional roguelikes, in terms of the mainstream, not in terms of the niche or the fan base, I think those are very much going to be a dud in terms of trying to make a new one in that style right now.
If you're talking about sales, yes. I think the traditional roguelike is not going to be very profitable, if profitable at all.
It will, of course, have a fan base. Like, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that, but in terms of hitting something like the Binding of Isaac, FTL, Slay the Spire numbers, I just don't see it.
In terms of breaking even, it's far less likely. But it's also more likely at the same time, because it all depends. Because like it's less likely because you're not going to have as big as consumer base.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe more likely because it's so niche that people don't get very many of that, and the people who are hardcore for that will maybe dive all over your game. We see that with Avenger games, where it's the same 20 people
Mm-hmm.
that buy every single Avenger game that exists out there. Or maybe it's more than 20, but you get my point. There's not many of them, but all of them buy every single Avenger game that comes out. Just like, I'm sure there's some people that buy every traditional rogue that comes out. But is that enough to break even? Well, it depends on how much you spent on your game. And, and how, if you actually do appeal to them, and if those people are actually aware of you. Because if you appeal to them and they're not aware of you, you lost. If they know about you but you don't appeal to them, then you lost too. They have to be aware that you exist. They have to, and whatnot. But you have to check off all these boxes. But it's a lot harder in many ways to succeed that way, rather than a more bigger, broader audience, which is what you would get with roguelikes and roguelites and deck builders and action roguelites, because those have a lot more big and broad consumer base. I think right now the deck builder is probably the biggest of them, wouldn't you say? Right at the moment, it's always shifting. Probably in 2 or 3 years, when somebody says, I'm going to build a deck builder, because I've seen What is a Rogue podcast, by the time you release your game, deck builder may not be hot anymore, that may be deep in decline. And that's definitely the trouble with the game industry, one of the troubles with the game industry. But like, right now, I think the deck builders are the hottest of them.
Yeah. And again, I think part of the problem is that when one of these examples becomes kind of the trendsetter, everybody tries to copy it. And even if your game legitimately does something different, it's still going to get compared to whatever is the top dog. And again, we've asked this question many times. Why should I play your deck building roguelike when I still have Slay the Spire?
because I'm all way better than Slay the Spire.
But how do you convey that to an audience who sees Slay the Spire with over 70,000 reviews on Steam and your game with maybe less than 1,000?
Well, one way is through art aesthetics.
Mm. Yeah.
Which is the reason why we've seen PUBG completely get dominated by Fortnite.
Yep.
Because there was a vast difference in those graphical aesthetics. You had the Unity shop assets versus these custom Fortnite Fortnite assets, And then they were also different. They had the building and whatnot on top of that, and that's how they were able to trounce all over PUBG, is because they were more aesthetically pleasing, and they were they were legitimately different, and you kind of need to be both,
Yeah.
and when Slay the Spire looks so good already, kind of hard to look much better than Slay the Spire.
Yep.
Which is, I think, one of the things that really hurt Monster Train, because I think Monster Train does legitimately look better than Slay the Spire, but it's not like PUBG, Fortnite differences. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's it's more like a level of iteration rather than just a complete curb stopping when it comes to aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes so much harder to stand out by comparison. The better and more polished that game that's setting the trend is.
Yeah. And I think another very unique issue that roguelikes have compared to some of the other genres is that because roguelikes are meant to be replayed so many times, it's a lot harder to move off of one that you like. Because again, like Binding of Isaac has, thousands of hours of gameplay in it at this point. Why should I play your version of the Binding of Isaac? It may still, you could do stuff legitimately better in it, but I still have all this other stuff to do in the Binding of Isaac. It's a game I already own, it's a game I already like. And it is, I think, getting harder and harder for these games to really stand out because of it. Because for everyone that does break the mold, it becomes a new trendsetter. So it's why we say, like, when we talk about like action roguelikes, Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, and Hades are probably like the top three. And everything else for a lot of people doesn't really exist anymore for them.
Yep. Meaning that most of the time to have a reasonable chance at success, you got to be a trendsetter.
Mm-hmm. And to Citizen's Common, like Hades, I think is probably going to be one of like, the new standards of like roguelike and roguelike design. It's also one of the few examples of it that also integrate that into the story. That the story actually made sense in this roguelike world. Like, the only comparison I think would be something like Rogue Legacy, and their whole thing is you're cursed, so you keep coming back to life, or, it's your family. In Hades, the entire cast recognizes the fact that everybody's immortal. And they make light of the fact that, I beat you on this run, or I beat you on that run.
Yeah. Didn't we do a store page review for Jupiter Hell? Or was that?
Don't think so.
We did a store page review on Jupiter something.
The Jupiter Moon's Tactics, I think.
Maybe that was it.
Yeah, Jupiter Moon's Mecha. Yeah. But yeah, Jupiter Hell, we did play that one. And, again, like, it is very much in that style. Yeah, and like Hades is very weird in terms of whether or not it falls on roguelike or roguelite because it does have a ton of persistence in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the future, excuse me, is really going to be seeing where else can people experiment with adding in roguelike elements. Because again, if you're just going to build another action roguelike or another deck building roguelike, people I think aren't going to resonate with it. My voice really is dying. Like Deathloop would be a really good example. Like Deathloop is very much a triple A roguelite, probably more of a roguelite. And the same goes for Returnal as well. That AAA developers are finally starting to take notice of this trend. And
Gone through them 40 years.
yeah, only. But it is going to present a very interesting challenge for developers in terms of if they can hit the levels of procedural generation variants, but with a AAA budget, how are you going to compete with that?
Yep, that's gonna be hard.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there still is room. Again, like there are people who are going to buy every deck building roguelike. Just said they were going to buy every action roguelike, but trying to expand those audiences is going to be very difficult for the genre.
As there are people who will buy every FTL clone.
Or every adventure game.
Mm-hmm. Or every RPG.
Mm-hmm. And once I'm going to close my door while the phone's ringing.
I know
But
Josh buys every platformer. Platformer, rather.
and every masochism simulator.
Yeah.
But I think with that,
Most of which are platformers.
yeah. But speaking of that, that's a preview for our next episode. As episode 2 of our What Is a series is going to be talking about platformers, another genre that I've never played any games with, right?
No, you never played a platformer?
Or roguelike.
No.
This has all just been me guessing at what the genre is this entire time.
Yep. You've never played any of them.
I don't play video games here.
You never played a game in your life.
No. But let us wrap things up here. I think this was a really good discussion. And for those of you watching, if you have suggestions for a genre, or there's anything else you'd like us to talk about more in this, let us know in the comments below. Yep. And again, like
Yeah.
once you learn, like the beauty about roguelike design is that once you kind of figure out what's going on behind the scenes, you can just mess around in these games. And it's that joy of figuring out those crazy combinations that it's not the game telling you that A, B, and C is the ultimate build, it's you figuring it out of, experimentation and mastery. How to make these crazy runs pop.
Yeah. So I guess that's going to conclude our What is a Rogue podcast. And then next podcast, next stream podcast, we're going to be covering 2D platformers, 3D platformers, and physics platformers.
All
Or
platforming.
platformers, as we refer to them as.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to say there. So if you are new, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing. You will find links to all of our social medias down below.
Yeah. Join my Discord. You'll be able to, and Josh's Discord as well. But on my Discord in particular, you'll be able to play the game I'm working on once a month at our monthly dev chats. And what I'm working on is a grid-based CCG that is very, very unique. There's nothing like it. There are some things similar to it, like Triple Triad and Magic the Gathering. It's like if Triple Triad and Magic the Gathering had a baby, that would be my game, Neon Continuum. And we, might be one of those trendsetters here soon. And hopefully. And so join the Discord, get to check that out. come to my YouTube channel, go to Josh's YouTube channel, whichever one you're watching from, and hit the smash the lick button and lick the smash button on both of our channels. Links to everything is down in the description as always.
Mm-hmm. If you want to catch these shows live, we do them Sundays at 4 p.m. ET. And we also do our In the Inquiry show where we review Steam store pages Mondays at 4 as well.
Yeah, and you've got your new book.
Yep. If you want to know more about horror design, be sure to check out Game Design Deep Dive Horror, now out where basically everywhere books are being sold. And tune in for Game Design Deep Dive free to play sometime in 2022.
Yep.
But that is going to do it. So everyone, have a great rest of your Sunday. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, whereas in the art and science of games. Until then, take care.
See ya.